What's up, everybody? This is Brad with the Daily Disney Blog Podcast, and I have another episode for you guys today. Back on the show again for a second time. A friend of the show, you know him from his website, jimhillmedia.com, and the Disney Dish Podcast with Jim Hill. Please welcome Jim Hill himself. What's up, Jim?
Hey, Brad. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. How's did you get any snow or anything crazy?
No, for once, that New Hampshire was sort of out of reach for this storm. I and I genuinely feel bad for the folks down in the Mid-Atlantic area because they don't get. I mean, last I heard, I think New York City had, I want to say, the second highest snow totals they've ever recorded down there, and likewise in the D.C., Virginia area. And down there, they don't really have snow removal equipment. They got like one guy with a plow.
Yeah, his name is Mr. Plow, and that name again is Mr. Plow.
Yeah.
My wife is from DC, so she's got a lot of friends that are posting pictures of like walking out of their front door, and it's just completely like all the way up. Like you open the door, it's just a wall of snow. It's insanity. So what I asked you to come on today's show for was because I have been doing some research for a blog that I've been trying to write recently, and I wanted some of your signature Jim Hill stories and a little bit of history of one of my favorite things at Disney's Hollywood Studios, Fantasmic. So I reached out to you over on, I think it was either email or Twitter, and asked you to come on because I know that this is like your thing here, having all these awesome stories for stuff. So I'm going to pass it off to you and let's talk some Fantasmic.
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting to talk about, the Hollywood version, because in order to do that, you really have to jump back to the Disneyland version, which, they'd been talking. I mean, that show opened in May of '92, but I've got documentation from February of 1982 where they were talking about, we need to do something down on the rivers of America. In fact, they referred to it, I guess, as the River Spectacular. But of course, what's kind of weird is that in this sort of financial document, they sort of scribbled in like, okay, we'll put $100,000 down, and that's what we use to make this River Spectacular. And by this time, this thing actually opened 10 years later, budget had crept up a wee bit, to $30 million. But I mean, they had been doing shows on the river there forever. For example, there was a show they used to call the Rollicking River Review, which was, they would just sort of roll the Mark Twain into position and just sort of park it, right in the center, dead center of the rivers of America, and put a jazz band on there, and people would gather and watch these people perform. And it was just sort of like, so the people from entertainment knew we have this great stage, and at the same time we have we've got the Columbia, we've got the Mark Twain, we've got the war canoes, we've got all of these things we could use as props. And it's like, so what are we going to do? They wanted to make use of the space, especially at night when, frankly, people, the park was lopsided. They had so many people over, in Tomorrowland, doing thrill rides and that sort of thing. It's like, we need to give them a reason to go over to the other side of the park. Mm-hmm. And so they began developing ideas. For the longest time, it was actually Don Dorsey, the guy who did the first version of Illuminations, who was writing herd on the show. Mm-hmm. And a lot of interesting ideas got, tossed around at that point. That there was one version of the show that Don was in charge of where he was like, well, look, it's, we've got the Haunted Mansion right over there. We should be doing, and it's nighttime. What if, the 999 happy haunts came out and, started, performing around the river and that sort of thing. In fact, there's one piece of concept art, if you guys want to see something really interesting. You Google Don Dorsey and Fantasmic, and he's got a web page up. and there's a shot of basically what it looks like is the organist from the Haunted Mansion, but he's like Maleficent sized. I mean, he's looming up
Whoa.
behind the even then they were talking about creating a sort of a show building, sort of where the cider mill is located now. But yeah, it's this giant ghost-like figure rising up behind that, and there's also a similar piece of concept art where it's sort of a ghost ship where they retrofit the Columbia, only it's got tattered blue sails and that sort of thing. And it really was kind of an interesting idea, though. Don't know if it would have played year round, but
that is a very interesting idea. And as me being a huge Haunted Mansion fan, like having a nighttime, because like you get the ghost host kind of narrating Hallowishes at Mickey's Not So Scary, but having like a really cool, like even like a ghost ship themed nighttime spectacular just sounds absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and but again, Don tried for a number of years and just couldn't put, it just couldn't deliver the goods. And I think part of the problem was that, Don of all people, understood. It's like, look, this isn't just spending a little money. If we're gonna, put effects on the river and that sort of thing, we have to spend some big dough. I mean, for example, even at this point, the rivers of America are still lined with clay. All right. And this is the same clay that Walt Disney had to put in 55, because the first time they filled the river, the sandy soil that they dug the river in, it just, slurped right down and went out of sight. And, and the other thing, frankly, is this is the late 80s, early 90s, where California, just like today, is dealing with some drought-related issues. And even with the clay lining the river, they were losing 50,000 gallons a day through the rivers of America. And it was like, if we want to have a stable performance service and, we want to be able to do effects, that come up out of the water, whether it's flame or mist curtains or that sort of thing, we're probably going to have to line, shut down the river, remove all the clay, put in a cement bottom so it's finely sealed, and then again, and so we can create these show pits and that sort of thing where the fire effects and the water screens can be based out of. And it was getting really, really expensive, really, really fast. And so for the longest time, it would get proposed and people would go, I don't want to spend that money. I don't want to spend that money. But starting in 1989, you had Splash Mountain open the middle of that year. And, Disney had already had to drain the river to put in Splash Mountain. And, for the ride out, portion where you come down to the Briar Patch. And, they'd had the engineers walk the river and they had them look at the Columbia and the Mark Twain. In fact, that was the other thing. The Mark Twain really needed some TLC at that point. And so it's like, all right, so let's look at this show. And it's actually the thing that sort of finally made them decide to go forward with Fantasmic was Michael Eisner, was loving, the attendance bump that they got in 89 and into 1990 off of Splash Mountain. And they'd okayed construction of Mickey's Toontown, which was supposed to open in 92, but wound up sliding because of construction issues to January of 93. And so here's Eisner looking at 92, and it's like, well, what do we got to drive attendance? And it's like, well, we don't have anything, Michael. And it's like, crap. Okay, well, then what about this river show? So you guys have been talking about. And 20 months out, wow. He basically calls the head of entertainment and says, it's that sort of that wonderful moment from Muppet Vision. It's a 3.5 hour glorious pageant. And it's like, you got a minute and a half. And that's it. You got 20 months to design this thing. Go. and so they go.
Wow,
They
that's
just
insane.
well, it
20
is,
months
and
out.
well, and that coupled with the fact that and in fact, that this is what kind of annoys me about the whole, oh my God, they're tearing up the rivers of America to put in Star Wars land, and they're desecrating my childhood. And it's like, you guys were, 1992. Do you remember anything at all about how they basically took the other end of Tom Sawyer's Island and just ripped it out? It was gone. Because they had to create the huge show pit for the hydraulic lifts to get Mickey up. They had to have some place to hide the dragon. They had to have all the space for equipment. And so it's like all of that stuff in the river got torn out. And in fact, Bruce Gordon was telling me the story. Just the thing that made him craziest is just before Eisner greenlit Fantasmic, Imagineering had spent months, literally months, putting together a brand new sound profile for the rivers of America. So when you travel the river at night, because you couldn't see, a lot of the show elements, so it's like, okay, brand new soundtrack that, took into consideration that people were traveling in the dark, and, it was nighttime, so you had crickets, you had night animals and birds calling, and a different narration for the boat, which now nobody gets because, it's like, okay, we spent all that money, we spent all that time, hey, we're doing this nighttime show, and the river, anytime, and the gimmick of the show was anytime the park was open after dark, they would run Fantasmic, which meant that the Columbia and the Mark Twain had to be taken out of service at like 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon to be prepped.
Huh.
So, well, anyway.
I'm going to pause real quick, one second. Going back to the whole people freaking out over Star Wars Land, am I wrong in saying this, that isn't most of what is going to be removed from that part for Star Wars Land, isn't that going to be like stuff that you can't really access or see anyway for now? Well, I mean, you will pass, we're losing out on the really bad, waving Indian, and yeah, I mean, you could look out of the train and see, in fact, that's kind of the irony, is that you could look out of the train and see where they had the Fantasmic stuff docked, that you could see the crocodile. You could see now Flotsam and Jetsam, and then you'd roll through the the backmost part of that Native American village, which is now going to survive. It's just going to be moved further down the line. Okay, so I don't understand why everybody's freaking out. I've never been to Disneyland. So I've only seen maps and stuff, so it's kind of hard for me to, like, without going, haven't not been yet, kind of visualizing what they're missing. So I'm trying to like visualize it in my head. So I from what I keep reading stuff where it's like it's not anything that people were having access to anyway, and I was like, dude, you're getting Star Wars Land. Relax, it's gonna be fine. Well, I mean, you have to understand that it's like the Woody Allen joke, that he loves to tell about the two women that are resort up in the Catskill and complaining, just basically, God, the food here is so terrible, and it's like, yes, in such small portions, just that's the thing that with Disneyland fans, they either complain because something that they love is being torn out, or they complain because that they haven't changed things in years. Yeah, it's I don't get that. It's like I call it the Saturday Night Live effect, where it's like every new generation of Saturday Night Live people, and then like there's a new cast, people are like, oh, remember back when it was Will Ferrell, and then like if you go back in time, people are like, oh, remember the SNL sucks now. Remember when it was Chevy Chase and all those other people, and you're just like, but wait, was it ever really good in the moment, or is it just we remember it being good like after we reflect on it? Yeah, it's and I'm old enough to have actually seen Saturday Night Live in its first season in real time, and it was better. Well, no, it's actually, I can tell you for a fact that in the second year after Chevy Chase left to go pursue a film career, people began complaining then about, oh, it's not as good as it used to be. Yeah, it's like in year 2 they established that pattern. I always use that as an analogy. I love it. It's like, who's this Bill Murray guy, this talentless jerk?
why should we watch him?
Yeah.
We've lost that great American comedy giant Chevy Chase. So, anyway, back to the Fantasmic. So yeah, the construction begins summer of '91. They drain the river. By January of '92, they're hammering away, and they've got the cider mill built, and they're resurfacing the entire, ripped out the clay, putting in the cement, and they've taken the Mark Twain down to the studs. I mean, it's just that they're retooling this whole boat, and but the interesting thing is they get the water screen technology, okay? And you have to understand that was one of the other things of the show. They didn't actually know if it was going to work. In fact, it wasn't till a month before the show officially opened to the public that, they were like, this water screen technology, which Disney had bought based on a video that a French company had sent them. And I believe this technology was initially used for a presentation for a French anniversary of some kind. I'm blanking. It would have been 1990, 1991. But again, it was just, the notion of, will this work in a theme park setting? So
they'd already put everything in the ground, and they're sitting here going, this might not work after all of this?
Honestly, in fact, they would... And then, they have three months of after-hours rehearsals where they find out the hard way. I mean, for example, when you watch the show now, and it's so choreographed, you're seeing, fireworks shells go off to music cues. And, Barnett Ricci, when interviewed about this, like, you don't understand, we had to do everything backwards. That it was one of these things where, when you set off a firework, you then have to do the 1, 2, 3 count, and then it explodes. And then you have to work backwards from the time it launched to the time it exploded is this amount of time. And so you had to sort of fine tune your score so that, when the firework actually exploded was when the music beat was. Whoa. And so it was, all of this sort of stuff. And, and that coupled with, the initially there was supposed to be this huge sculpted, amazingly impressive version of Maleficent, as the dragon from Sleeping Beauty. And in fact, another thing I really recommend to folks, if you want to see something spectacular, you go to Kevin Kidney's webpage and dig around into the Fantasmic files, because Kevin actually did a lot of the sculpting on, for example, the crocodile and the Ursula puppet. But at the same time, he also sculpted this amazing version of the dragon that was supposed to appear in the show, and then stop motion animated it to show what it could be like. And you get to see the version that he wanted to build. And again, but the problem was the budget. The budget begins creeping up on this thing, and it depending on who you talk to at Disney will admit that it cost $30 million, though I've seen contemporary, press accounts from 92, 93 where they're like, could have been 30, possibly 70. Whoa! Depending on what, how much of this you're, do you say just the show, or do you say how much it costs to, to redo the Mark Twain, or how much it costs to fill the river with cement and all that? But again, they're a month out, and they still don't know if it's all going to work. And finally, one night, they get it up on its feet. And this is, also after the first night, they fire up the fire effect. And, there's a lot of ducks that live at Disneyland that didn't get the memo. That I've seen the video of that night. You can actually, the technician's like, oh no. It's like, because, the fire effect comes on and there's a bunch of ducks like, what the? So, the interesting thing is that night 2, the ducks definitely knew what was going on. So, they hear the music and they're like, okay, we need to get out of here. And I mean, the Ducks are at least smart enough now to know that, all right, it's they're pulling those docks, those barges out again. Time to go up, and eat, go hang out by Hungry Bear. Just don't be down here by where the water catches fire. But anyway, they and the other aspect of this is this show was originally supposed to open April of 1992, and so Disney's getting ready for this big press event, and then just about in the same week that it's supposed to debut, the Rodney King verdict comes down.
Uh-oh.
And there are riots in LA where a good portion of the city is on fire. And you have to understand that the initial catchphrase for Fantasmic at Disneyland was "Be there when the night ignites." And Disney couldn't move fast enough to Deep Six that catchphrase for it, and more to the point, they pushed off the opening till May 12th of 92. And so they opened the show, and and this becomes a hit right out of the box. In fact, it was so successful within a month's time of the show opening up. I mean, for example, they figured Disneyland was hoping that they'd get like 6,500 people per show to watch the thing. They began to realize that people would just crowd in to watch this, and they were averaging 11,000 people per show.
Wow!
And this was three shows a night, and so people were crowding into the park. So Disney just turns around and immediately takes advantage of this, and they bump the admission price to Disneyland by 4.5% within 1 month's time.
All because of Fantasmic, huh?
All because of Fantasmic.
That's crazy.
And then going forward into 93, that this had been such a huge show, or so successful, that in the winter months when Fantasmic was shut down, they actually went in and tore up much of the area around New Orleans Square, the walkway around Rivers America, and created if you ever get to the park now, you'll notice that there's walkways that are sort of tiered. That there's one right down at water level, and there's one up 2 or 3 feet, and then there's a further one back that's up about 6 feet. And this was done deliberately to create, again, the sort of a viewing stand effect, so that when people came in to watch the show, that they'd be able to do that, and they'd be able to accommodate that many more people per show. Conversely, though, again, I just and today doing some research prior to the show, I've come across June of 1993. Disneyland's president Jack Lindquist is meeting with folks in the Anaheim area, and he's apologizing to them because it's like, it was one thing when you live next to Disneyland and there was a fireworks show every night at 10. And it's like, okay, it's the fireworks show. It'll be over in 10 minutes. I live next to Disneyland. I can take this. Where Fantasmic, some nights, during the summer, 3 nights was performed 3 times. In fact, there were nights where they did 4 shows.
Wow.
And it's, and he had to go back to them and apologize. Yes, I know the show's too nosy. Yes, it's in a part of the park that actually backs up against a residential neighborhood, and the park had to turn around and spend $500,000 to reconfigure the way the speakers were set up and sound to mitigate the sound issues.
Dang, that's crazy. I don't know. I feel like if you live near Disneyland, that's just something you gotta have to put up with. But I guess they do have to go out of their way.
Yeah, no.
That's I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted about that. That's a lot of money just to kind of reconfigure the sound.
Well, but again, that's the thing that you have to understand. At the same time, this is when Disney's trying to get the Anaheim City Council to approve the expansion plan. I mean, at this time,
yeah. So that makes sense. They want to make everybody happy, and
yep. They were trying to get Westcott out of the ground, and that's the theme park that eventually sort of devolved into Disney's California Adventure.
I don't think devolved is a strong enough word.
Anyway, so
go ahead. No, sorry. Go ahead.
no. So obviously, here's this hit show in California, and so the question right off the bat was, well, where's it going? Is it coming to Florida? And and the thinking was that we just got Splash Mountain at the Magic Kingdom, so it just kind of made sense that that this would also travel east. And for a time, people were really expecting it to show up on the rivers of America. Was that
ever considered from Disney? Were there ever any plans to put it at Rivers of America in Magic Kingdom?
Well, the problem is compared to New Orleans Square and the other areas that hug, it was problematic. You only had, for example, you didn't have the two ships. You didn't have the Columbia and the Mark Twain. You only had, so, and don't get me wrong, they have used that as a performance space. I mean, just remember what they did with Princess and the Frog.
Yeah, I was going to say the Princess and the Frog thing. I didn't get to see that, but yeah, I remember hearing about that.
But yeah, it just, the other problem, frankly, is that, and face it, one of the reasons that Don Dorsey got tapped to develop the show initially is that, Disney had a nighttime, water show, the Illuminations. And so, and at the same time, you have 3 theme parks there. And, just the thinking was that, well, there aren't as many attractions at Disney MGM at this point, and maybe it makes more sense for it to be built there. And for a time, this project was actually known as Fantasmic Hollywood. And just an interesting side note here. My daughter Alice was born in March of 1994, and that year, before Alice was born, my then wife, Michelle Valladolid, the fabulous Disney babe over at Mice Chat, we did the Minnie's Moonlight Madness. Do you know this cast member competition they do? You ever heard of this?
No, I haven't, and that's weird because I'm friends with several cast members that I've never heard this.
Yeah, well, they do this after-hours cast member competition where basically what you do is 4 teams of 4 people are bungeed together, and then they run around the park answering trivia questions and doing challenges. It's great fun. In fact, we did it in '94 again before Alice was born.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
And so in '95, we decided we're going to do it again, and so. But Alice is an infant at this point, and we have her in a Snuggly, and we end up in the park, and we make it all the way through security. We make it to the backstage area. We are sitting backstage waiting for the competition to begin, and this cast member comes up and goes, "Oh, no, you can't do this with a baby in a Snuggly." And it's like,
thanks for telling me that now that we're...
Yeah, I mean, it's just like we're in the middle of the park. We walk by all these people. There's nothing in the rules that say this. And, so we go back and forth. And finally, the cast member, it's like, look, you can't do this. It's just, it's not safe. It's in dark parts of the park. You could hurt the child. And, and so Michelle is really grumbling loudly, but I volunteer that, like, look, you do the competition and I'll stay with Alice. And, but the Disney employees say, well, you can't stay out here in the park, But tell you what, I'll take you backstage to, one of our conference rooms. We'll set you up there. You can wait there till the competition is over and then rejoin your wife and leave the park. And so Michelle is complaining the whole time, and I'm pushing Alice in the stroller into this backstage building. And so the guy goes in, all right, we're going to put you up in this conference room. So he throws on the lights, and this is the conference room for Fantasmic Hollywood.
What?
I'm serious. The walls are covered with concept art. There's a blueprint on the wall of where they're going to build the, the arena. And, for example, I can tell you now, having looked at that, blueprint and perhaps maybe have taken a photo or two, that, for example, that version, Fantasmic Hollywood, in place of the Pocahontas scene that everyone knows now, there was supposed to be a 20,000 Leagues scene.
Oh man.
So from one side of the volcano or the island, came a nautilus, and from the other side of the island came a squid. And you were actually going to have Nemo on the deck and Ned Land, throwing torpedoes at this squid. In fact, if I remember correctly, it was supposed to be, again, a tropical island, and the show started off with Mickey, walking along the shore of this deserted island, and he finds the lamp from Aladdin, and he picks it up, he rubs it, and it's the genie who's driving the show. Basically, it's like, what do you want? And you get Friend Like Me, you get, it was a very different version of the show. In fact, to give you some idea of how bizarrely different the show was, during the battle with the Nautilus, Mickey is on stage, or on the island, and this giant pipe organ has risen up out of the sand. And Mickey is sitting there pounding on the keys.
Oh man!
But again, just to make this that much weirder, there's a mirror that reflects Mickey's face back to the audience. He's wearing the Phantom of the Opera half mask, only it's mouse shaped. But yeah, I saw all of the plans for Fantasmic Hollywood in 1995.
That is unreal.
Yeah, it was nuts. And but then, the project stalls because, as it turns out, Disney didn't want to pay the French company that had created the water screen effect. And, it took them a year or two to develop a water screen of their own that they could then use in Florida, and then go, hey, we don't need to use your technology anymore. And I believe when they updated Fantasmic in California, they actually swapped out to Disney-owned technology. And, so, that's a check that no longer goes in the mail.
That's insane. Let me back up one second real quick. So when they were planning to do this for Disney's Hollywood Studios, was this during while stuff was being produced there, or what time frame are we looking at here when they go, okay, it's a hit in Anaheim, we need to put it in Florida somewhere, let's do Disney's Hollywood Studios? Was that a concern at all, or since it was nighttime, were they kind of like, all the production will be wrapped up and we'll be able to do it full clip?
Yeah, I mean that in fact, what was kind of interesting is the original footprint for the Disney's Disney MGM version of Fantasmic. In fact, I don't know if you remember when they were going to build the David Copperfield Magic Underground restaurant.
Yes, I do remember that.
Okay, this restaurant would have, in fact, if you're sitting inside of the arena for Fantasmic at Disney Hollywood Studios now, if you were to look over to the extreme right, the original plan was that's where David Copperfield's restaurant was going to be located. In fact, as part of your dining experience there, all of the booths in that restaurant were going to move. They would rotate. And so when it was time for Fantasmic, your booth would have literally rotated to face what you thought was a solid wall. And as the show began, this was revealed to be a piece of polarized glass. And, suddenly the wall would go clear, and you had not only dinner, but you had Fantasmic.
That's really cool. A lot of us Disney fans, kind of fantasize about what could have been, and I think that David Copperfield restaurant could have been really cool if they'd have done it correctly.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, and that's a story for a whole nother time. But I remember, being in New York. In fact, the building that the Magic Underground was going to be housed in is still there. You can stand outside the facade of this thing and see how, there's all these weird cracks in the faux, the facade of this thing, because supposedly there was all this magic going on inside the building that was so strong it was cracking the facade. And I always think about the people who go in there now and like it's an Applebee's. Is this building going to fall down? It's like, well, no, it's
the world's worst Applebee's.
There you go. But anyway, so as a direct result, that version of Fantasmic doesn't wind up opening till between the delay of creating the new technology and all that, till October of 1998. And by then, they were trying to stress, for some odd reason, the Fantasmic Hollywood name gets dropped. But they stressed initially that this show is going to be 25% different than California, and eventually it's going to be 50% different. And so you get the Pocahontas bit, you get the but again they've got to build all of their props, so you get that steamboat that's very much more reminiscent of the Steamboat Willie Steamboat. But for a lot of people, it's weird, even though that they have seats and they're sitting down in an arena and, everyone's got great sight lines. Most people, if they're comparing the two shows, it's like, the California version is so much better. And I think a lot of that just has to do with the fact that, you've walked through this space earlier in the day, whether you're going to the Haunted Mansion or Splash Mountain or whatever. And it's a riverfront. It's got boats going back and forth, and you come back later, and now it's a stage. And
that is really cool.
It's the equivalent of getting double prizes, I guess. And of course, some 13 years later, Tokyo Disney Sea's got its version of Fantasmic, though. That version, Barnett Ritchie had heard on both the Disneyland and Walt Disney World versions. And and poor Barnett, she again, doing the research for the show, was just talking about the fact that, she's like, okay, well, so we'll bring stuff from California. And it's like, well, no, stuff in California doesn't necessarily work in Florida. I mean, for example, she was, she had to bring the exact fireworks from California. I figured, well, we've already got the timing down. This will be fine. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, no. You don't understand. This is Florida. The air is humid. The fireworks don't go up quite as high, quite as fast. And more to the point, because the air isn't dry, the smoke really lingers. And so it's like, she literally ends up back at the drawing board. And it's like, I got to get different stuff. And then, they had to, because the weather in Florida is so changeable. And, they ended up in this situation where people would be sitting in an arena for, they load people in 90 minutes to an hour before the show. And that's enough time for a hellacious, rainstorm to come, roaring up on the arena. And, everyone's sitting outside. So they actually had to invent, for lack of a better term, they call it a taste of Fantasmic. It's a 4-minute long piece of animation that they can show on a water screen that sort of gives you a taste of what the show is. And then it's like, well, you didn't waste all of your time. You got to see 4 minutes. Get out.
Weird. I've never seen it. That's interesting. I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah. Well, again, try to go see the show when it's about to rain, and they'll run that one out for you.
Interesting.
But yeah, if it hadn't been for this show, we wouldn't have things like World of Color out in California. This is in a lot of ways a pioneer show. But at the same time, it's just, in order to make this happen, in order to make this thing that people love, I mean, it'll be celebrating. In fact, what's kind of interesting, it's very deliberate timing on Disney's part to take Fantasmic and the Mark Twain and the Columbia and, the River Canoes, all of that down for, 2016, because they want it back up for 2017, because that's the 25th anniversary of Fantasmic. And they are, believe me, they're going to try to make as much hay as they can out of that anniversary.
That's interesting, man. Well, thank you so much. These stories were unreal, and I really kind of wish we'd have seen the Fantasmic Hollywood version of Fantasmic. That's kind of, God, every time you hear something like that, you're just like, man, what could have been?
Well, and more to the point, that's a show that they have been working on. I mean, for example, just in the past year or so, they brought in digital projection then, and they used that moment to update and upgrade the film. So, if you look at the movie now, particularly in that sort of bubble scene in the middle of it, you finally get Frozen. You finally get tangled. And yeah, that will continue to happen. That
I like it.
I have to say, it's entirely possible we'll see them update that show sometime soon. In fact, what I've been hearing, at least for the Disney Hollywood Studios version, is that show could get retooled for Walt Disney World's 50th anniversary, which I know that's 2021, folks, but in theme park time, that's not all that far away. 5 years is
that's not long. They got to start doing it now if they're going to start redoing stuff for 5 years out.
So, it's entirely possible we may finally get our Nautilus or something like that for the show. Here's hoping.
That'd be really cool. Well, man, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate it. And I know everyone that, your episode is the most downloaded episode I've ever had. And I appreciate you coming on, man. It's really cool to be able to sit down and talk to you. I'm a huge fan of everything you do, so it's really cool to be able to chat with you.
Oh, I appreciate that. And again, happy to come out again. Just give me a topic and we'll see what we can do.
Sounds good. Follow him at Jim Hill Media over on Twitter?
Yeah, and I'm going to be doing some new stuff over on HuffPo, and Len and I have. In fact, it's ironic, that's the work I did today. We're going to be doing our own Fantasmic show probably in April or May.
Oh, cool.
So this is the teaser, folks. We'll get to the other one shortly.
Awesome. The Unofficial Guide Disney Ditch podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and at Bandcamp. So make sure you guys go check that out. It's the best Disney podcast for the insider stuff. It's awesome. I listen to every single episode at least twice. So definitely go check it out if you haven't already. And please rate and review our show on Stitcher and iTunes as well. And Jim, thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Again, thanks for inviting me.
See you, buddy.
All right, take care.
You too.